to loyalists, from economic boom to economic bust. We've seen it all in this old house on Crocs Point. And so some people may know exactly where this house is, but others of you might not know where it is. So this is the house, and it's right on the St. John River. And if you're wondering where Crocs Point is, there's a picture of Keswick Ridge, and right at the intersection on Keswick Ridge. And here is kind of on the left of this map is Mataquac Dam. And this house is where the little heart is, right on the river, at the end of Crocs Point Road. And we always knew this is the ferry road. When I was growing up, it was just called the ferry road. It's was the dead end road where my school bus always turned every day when I was a kid. So I knew this house. The best place to see this house is from the other side of the river, from the south side on Highway 102. A lot of us call it the Old Trans-Canada. And you can just see this house kind of sitting there, just kind of quietly sitting on the riverbank. And my brother had been in this house many times because he worked on the farm, on the Sloat farm. And so Mildred Dunphy had fed my brother many times in this house, but I had never been in it. I had just seen it as at the school bus turn. Here's a map of 1878, and you can see right above the word Saint for St. John River, you can see where it says E.C. Lunt, and that is from the 1878 Atlas. You can see this house. This house was on that map. So we're going to just dive into just a little bit of history, what we know so far, and I'm still learning about this house. It has a long and complicated history, and so I'm going to tell you what we've learned so far. So, and my sources. What are my sources? Basically, New Brunswick Archives. They are awesome. If you're looking at an old property or looking into an old property, they're so helpful. And also my new friend, Evelyn Newell, who's the collections manager at King's Landing, has contributed. And I've kind of gradually pieced together the puzzle, the 258-year-old puzzle of this old place. And plus, you know, I've just talked to some local people, including my parents and the family that owned this place, Mary Lou Price, and just talking to other local people who remember this place really well. But here's what we know. We think that River House started in around 1763 as a maple syrup cabin and the home of Acadian Jean-Baptiste Cyr de Croc and his wife Marguerite, their 9 sons and 2 daughters. Croc was his nickname, and that's of course where we get the word Crocs Point. But his nickname was in reference, this is cool, was in reference to maple syrup, and translated from Acadian, a croquet means something very yummy that you can savor and enjoy. So basically, it's crunch point is where we get that word, Crocs Point. Jean-Baptiste's cabin is now the back part of this house. And so that kind of square part sticking out at the back, which of course has got different layers of siding and a different roof on it now, but that back square section is the original part of the house, and it's very uniquely constructed with these hand-hewn beams, that sort of U-shaped beams that are the structure of that place. Now, there's a book called The Century Homes of Keswick Ridge, which I recommend highly if you don't have a copy, and I know the Historical Society has copies of that book for you, but this book says that there was another house built onto the front of this maple syrup cabin, but eventually that house was removed and moved down the road a few feet and sat there until it fell down. We think that this property in Keswick Islands in general, now we may have some historians on this chat that know way more about this than me, but we think that this area was involved or kind of played a part in the 7 Years' War between the French and the English from 1756 to 1763. And local folklore is that the Keswick Islands saw action during that time. And of course, if you're from around here, you've heard about the buried treasure that was found up on the hill just behind this house. I think in the 1950s, there was a chest full of gold coins and a French cannon that were found right here. And I'm sure, again, there's somebody that knows way more about that than me. The Acadian settlers, for the most part, were squatters on the property that they occupied, meaning that they were hard-pressed to prove their title to their lands. And this was not a big issue until the arrival of the Loyalists in 1783, who were granted the same land that the Acadians occupied. So they unsuccessfully petitioned for the titles to their property. They then asked the government for blocks of land up in Madawaska, which they were granted. So Jean Cyr, who built this maple syrup cabin, his family took off for Madawaska, but he stayed and he didn't leave, and he died in this area. So then, what happened after that? Well, we know what happened. The Loyalists. So the property at Crocs Point was granted to a Loyalist named Patrick Wall in 1789, and it was grant number 125 in New Brunswick. Then the property passed around to quite a few different Loyalist families. And from deeds, again, this is from archives, from deeds, we know that it went to George Curry Smith in 1854, then to Thomas Smith, who I think was his son, and then James Smith, and then on to David Goodine in 1871. And finally, it was sold to Enoch Lunt in 1874. And this is a picture of Enoch and his wife, Augusta. And it remained in Enoch's family for many, many generations. Now, there's a great website that I discovered about the Loyalists. It's a UNB website, and it's called New Brunswick Loyalist Journeys. And obviously that picture right there is of the governor's house in Fredericton. And so again, if you're not from here, this house is really just up the river from where that picture was painted. Okay, well, fast forward a few years, and in 1893, the front part, or the main, what we know now as the main part of this house, was built by Mr. Lunt and his wife Augusta. Now, archives again says that Enoch was the son of a riverboat operator from St. John. So you can just kind of imagine Enoch sailing up the river on a riverboat with his dad and picking out this property to build his house. The river doesn't flood there, and it's such a beautiful spot. So you can just kind of imagine how that might have happened. Now, this is where it gets interesting for me and my family, because Enoch hired my great-great-great-grandfather, Jonathan Yerxa, from Tripp Settlement to build this new structure. There's the house, the way it looked when it was first built. And this is my great-great-great-grandfather, Jonathan Yerxa from Tripp Settlement. I love his hairstyle. You might think that young people now have strange hairstyles, but that's nothing new. I think it's important to keep in mind that the late 1800s were a boom time in New Brunswick. So, you know, you can see that in the architecture of St. John and Fredericton. A lot of our really amazing buildings were built in the late 1800s. And you can see the optimism in their architecture from that period. Just look at, you know, houses up and down that line the St. John River. They were all built around the same time, 1870 to 1890. It was really a boom time. Railways were being built, and, you know, suddenly this little British colony called New Brunswick had a very bright future, fueled by hardworking immigrants and industry with the world, including the United States and Europe. So my great-great-great-grandfather was a second generation New York immigrant. They came from Lower Manhattan, and they were loyal to the British Crown. And so they ended up here in New Brunswick. And he was a well-known carpenter in this area. And he and his son, Daniel, built many homes around here. In fact, if you have an old house on Keswick Ridge, there's chances are it was built by this guy. So any ideas, how much do you think it costs to build this house? If you have...
I have a, it's not a guess.
Is that Mary Lou?
No, it's Heather.
Oh, it's Heather.
Yeah.
Okay, that's no fair. Anybody else? Anybody else? I'm going to look in the chat and see if anybody has any idea. Well, the answer is a whopping $230. It cost to build this house. And the reason that we know that exactly is because we have the receipt. Mary Lou Price has the receipt for this house where Enoch paid my grandfather. So I'm going to show you the receipt from this house. And here it is. I'm going to try to, it's really hard to read, but I'm going to try to read a little bit of this because it's really funny. And I just have to change. So it says the upper flat, also a veranda and the front and the side, and the roof on the new house to be carried over with the connection to the old house. Oh, he also had to renovate the log cabin on the back. He also had to do that for the $230. For which Enoch Lunt agrees to pay Jonathan and Dan New York. So the sum of $230, including, now get a load of this, including $20 worth of work, including room and board, while building all work to be done in a workman-like manner according to plans and specifications. So he was paid $230, but that included the materials. So he was paid $20 labor to build the house for he and his son, and it probably took them more than, you know, it was a 2 or 3 year project, I think. So, but he got room and board, which apparently was quite a bonus back then, just being fed. And I think it's amazing that this receipt still exists. So this is the indigenous people right across the river, just upriver a little bit. And over their shoulders, sort of the right at where the priest is standing there is where the river house is, sort of behind them. And so we know that the Lunt family had a good relationship with the indigenous folks. And we know part of that we know because of what was left behind in the house. And that was a lot of baskets and beadwork and snowshoes. And we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, one of the other really important aspects of this house was that it was the ferry crossing house. And this was just before my time, but I've heard all the stories. And the ferry crossing had been there for a very, very, very long time, possibly the early to mid 1700s, because it was written right in the property plans and deeds that this was the ferry crossing. And it was known as Lunt's Crossing, appropriately. And then the McKinley crossing. So the McKinleys lived on the other side of the river. There's a blue house that looks very similar to River House, and that was the McKinley house. And the ferry went back and forth between those two properties. So, you know, I would say originally this place was kind of like a Grand Central Station, because you had, you know, a new railway running across the south side with a railway stop. You had riverboat traffic up and down the St. John River. And so this kind of became the gateway to Keswick Ridge. This little point of entry became the gateway to Keswick Ridge. And that would have been cool to see, just the flurry of activity down there. So I think, you know, seeing a bit of opportunity. Oh, and here's a couple of news clippings from the Daily Gleaner of the old ferry. This one is great. Look at the horses on a treadmill running the ferry, and the ladies with their hats, and the water wheel. Pretty amazing. And you can see River House there in the background with the old elm trees. There were elm trees lining the river. Of course, they're gone now, but huge, stately elm trees all over the Keswick Islands area. So I started to say a minute ago, I think seeing a bit of opportunity here, the Lunts began a rooming house and a restaurant stop, and it was called the River View Hotel. And I'm told the sign still exists that's up over the front door here. It says the Riverview Hotel. And we also know that it became a popular Sunday drive for Fredericton people to drive their teams of horses upriver on the south side, cross the ferry at Lunt's Crossing, and have lunch, or dinner, as we call it in New Brunswick, and go back to town through Douglas. And of course, during winter, people crossed on the ice road here. And even in my family, there's lots of stories about the ice road, and, you know, young guys jumping the cracks in the ice with their horses, or later with their cars. So that's just part of our history here. Now, as if that wasn't enough, this was a huge scout destination. So Mr. Lunt's daughter, Luli, became a well-known resident of this area. She was ma to hundreds, or I don't know, maybe thousands of scouts. She was a great cook, apparently, and lots of sort of, I think they called them jamborees, scouting jamborees were held here over the years, and she cooked for them all. One of Luli's daughters was Mildred, and she married Colin Dunphy. And I remember Mildred very well. And of course, Colin was in the Air Force in the Second World War. So what happened after this era? Oh, there's some more. There's another scout picture. And this is Luli, who was the scout ma and cooked for all those generations of scouts. Well, what happened after that was, of course, the Matiquac Dam, which changed everything around here. And there's the picture we've all seen of the sketch of what the dam would look like in the future. Some construction in that area. And then, of course, when the dam was constructed, the ferry stopped running and the property became kind of stranded on a dead end road. And of course, it continued to be a thriving family farm, farmed by the Sloat and then the Dunphy family. But then its importance in the community sort of, you know, just died down because it was on a dead end road. And that's a picture of the house today. So why did I buy this house? You can see that picture was taken on the day that I bought this house. And I had a friend come to visit from Ontario, and she's on this chat right now. And she is a real estate agent, and she found the house on her phone and said, Gary, you should have a look at this property. And of course, I knew the property. And of course, I grew up around the corner on Highway 105, just below Brewer's Store. Both sides of my family have been in this community for many generations, both Loyalist families, the Sharpes and the Yerkses. And my grandmother's family, the Smiths, built the old house just around the corner from this house, the Smith house, which we know is the McCullough house. So I guess you could say I've got strong roots in this area. I went to Keswick School, and FHS, and UNB, and I was looking for something interesting in this area to work on, and wow, did I find it. My parents and I had done a renovation of the Douglas and Lois Merethy house. We call it the Maples, and we run that as a bed and breakfast now. So I thought, wow, maybe I could have 2 bed and breakfasts. And so I originally started looking at this house as sort of another bed and breakfast. And then, of course, my mother told me that my great-great-great-grandfather built this place, and that kind of sealed the deal for me. And I thought it would be amazing to be restoring a house that your great-great-great-grandfather built. So, and also before I purchased it, the plan was to demolish the house because obviously the property is worth way more in building lots right on the river. But I thought I just didn't want to see it demolished. So in October of 2019, I purchased this abandoned home plus 10 acres. And that's on the week that we demolished it. My dad went out and cut this dead elm tree right behind the house. And you can see how massive this tree is in comparison with my dad. So then the house came with content. So that was really interesting, but it was a ton more work than I kind of anticipated. And it was hard to know where to start. Everybody had kind of assumed it was going to be torn down or burned by the fire department or something like that. So animals had kind of taken over, lots of mice. And so it was messy in there. And we hauled away bags of garbage, or actually I didn't haul them away. The garbage guy was amazing and picked up many, many garbage bags full. And then I heard it was large item day on the day it occurred. So I went down and took out every mattress in the house, all on the same day. And the garbage guy was amazing. He picked up every one of them. And so my mom and I went through everything in the house. She just knew what was old and what was not old, and what might be valuable. So we sent 10 truckloads of more modern stuff to a new thrift store in Fredericton called Seed the Need. And they came with the truck and just kept loading up. And then, but the more antique stuff we kept in the house. And again, my friend Heather DiFrancesco from Ontario, I called her up. I don't know that much about antiques, but I called her up and said, help, like, how am I going to get rid of this stuff? And so she came down and we planned a huge estate sale for November 22nd, 2019. We didn't know if anybody would come or not, but actually 300 people showed up over 2 days, and they pretty much cleaned the place out, which is awesome. And we just had a lot of fun putting together the sale, and of some very, very interesting items. I'll just show you a few of them here. Plus, it was fun to see people in Keswick Ridge that I had not seen for many years. That was the most fun for me. And we donated 400 items to King's Landing, including most of these baskets. So I just think that's really cool that they will be taken care of at King's Landing. I kept a few of my favorite items to put back in the house whenever it gets finished. And step 2 was to clean out the attic and the basement. This is scarier than you might think. The basement was packed full of a lot of stuff that was moldy and musty. And so I had these 2 guys, Chris and John, came, and we unloaded the basement. The basement also had some water in it, so we had to deal with that. And we just kept hauling away stuff. Eugene Price loaned me his trailer and hauled away a few things for me. And here's Chris and John again. And this is what the basement looks like now. I think it's beautiful. And those huge granite stones that probably were hauled there by horses. So quite a task to get that cleaned up. This is Marcus from Romania, Chris and John, and that was my cleanup crew. And we've had, I think, 5 or 6 fires just getting rid of some layers of stuff, just getting rid of stuff. That was an old moldy table that was in the basement. No sooner did we start working in here than I figured out we were not alone. I would work there during the day, and then I would come back the next day, and it was like somebody had been in the house. And I thought maybe it was squirrels or something, and I could not figure out how they were getting in there. But this is how they were getting in. And a neighbor walked by and saw a raccoon coming out of this hole in the eaves of the house. And so that tipped me off that there was a family of raccoons. Sure enough, the plumber was up there, and he's like, I'm not going back up until you get rid of the raccoons. And so we trapped all the raccoons in a live trap and let them go in the forest a long distance from the house, hopefully not near your backyard. And that's Marco and I repairing that section of eaves, and it's all good now. It's all safe and secure. No more raccoons. So then we began the process of repairing and restoring. And we're still really in that phase right now, but we started looking at what we needed to, fix. And there were some, surprises in the house, including some areas of rot. So one by one, we just tackled these areas and repaired them. This is an example of that. So this is the upstairs hall, and this floor was basically rotted away, and there had been a wood stove in this front hall, and some of the boards had been burned by embers coming out of the fire, but most of it was just rot. And so we found some 1-inch boards in Douglas Matthew's barn, and we had to cut them to the right width to fit where the old boards had been. We had to plane them down, and then we replaced these boards. I made an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of all these boards and the different widths and thicknesses and stuff like that. And this is the result. So we're pretty proud of that floor. And I think this is really evidence of the Depression, talking about different eras in New Brunswick history. So we know that from 1929 onward was the Depression. Nobody had any money to fix anything. And I think probably the roof was just leaking and they just couldn't afford to fix it. I think every family was in the same boat. that era. And so that resulted in lots of repair. Now, there's another area, that's a hallway. And we had been walking across this hallway, not knowing that it was completely rotted out, like the layer of flooring beneath was rotted out. And so that's it now, that's it restored. So like I said, we just have kept at it, just one place at a time, trying to fix things like that. Now, when I say we, let me tell you what I mean. I wasn't long into this before I realized I was in over my head, and I would definitely need help, like a carpenter. The house was in worse shape than I thought. So my father, Harold Sharpe, he's 88 years old, and he's a retired carpenter, but he still knows how to fix anything with wood. And he can swing a hammer. And so he's really been the brains of the carpentry on this, and there's no way that I could have tackled this project without his really practical help. And my mother, oh, there's another picture of the floor restored. My mom, and she's 81, she doesn't look it, but she has removed much of the wallpaper in the house. But even more significantly, and that's Marcus as well, and he's helped with the wallpaper. And for some reason, I can't move in my presentation. There we go. So that's my mom working at wallpaper. Lots and lots of layers of wallpaper. This red room was the absolute worst. It was paint over wallpaper. Also, very significantly, my mom has worked on all the millworks of the house, so the doors and the woodwork, filling them, sanding them. There are 26 doors in this house, 26, and they all needed work. And my dad has, rehung almost all the doors. They all needed work and new latches and stuff like that. So that's what we did all last summer. So I guess you could say fixing up this house has really been a family project. And it's really been our COVID project because, COVID has complicated things, but as it turns out, it's been just a fantastic COVID-19 project because there was times where there's just nothing else to do. So I would go down and do some sanding or do some wallpaper removal and little by little, those jobs are getting done. And I would say that River House has given us sort of a creative outlet during the pandemic, just thinking about solving problems. And so we're really thankful for that. And there will be a community open house whenever we get this done. I'm not putting any date on that because we just don't know, but we want all of you to come and see it when we're done. Like I said, we just want this to be a place that the community is proud of. So here's another door picture. This is the bathtub, restoring the bathtub. This bathtub was closed in, and we opened it up and cleaned it up and restored the inside and then painted it. This is a floor that had to be leveled. That's what it looks like now. This is my niece, Maddie, my mom cleaning. So why do this? Why, why got all this work? Every day I ask myself.
Yeah, this is what I come up with on this thing. Mike helped me get to it, but I'm not quite sure if this is the right one or not.
Our host might be able to mute. So why do this? That's the question. I really wanted to find a project that would invest in the community. I love interesting. And I think I'm really just, tired of seeing our heritage disappear. I think it should be preserved for the next generation. And after living in other parts of Canada, I can say that I think we have something special here in the Maritimes, something very unique. And heritage is good for our economy. People love to come and see things that are restored. And I love history because it reminds us of who we are. Even though our ancestors' lives were filled with challenges and hardships, they built these big, beautiful houses with tons of optimism for the future, which I think we should have as well. And of course, my great-great-great-grandfather built this structure, so I have the privilege of, he built it for $20. It's costing me more than $20 to fix it. But we have the privilege of, of working on what our ancestors came up with. And Keswick is a great place to live. It's a thriving, growing community just outside Fredericton. It's also home. And I'm hoping that fixing up this little corner of Keswick Ridge will contribute to making this a great place for generations to live. So that's it. And I think we're going to take some, there's a picture of the river. That's my wonderful neighbors, Eugene and Mary Lou. That's some of my family. That's the front porch, which when we're done, you're welcome to come and sit on. There we go.
Our house.
I've got a question.
I think we're going to have Heather McDonald's going to field our questions, I think, on the chat.
I think, Anne, did you have remarks you wanted to make before we moderate some questions?
We'll save our thanks till after the questions, okay?
Sounds
So
great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, let's dive into questions. Gary, that was amazing. So interesting. I've been riveted this entire time thinking that you're just up the road. I have a couple questions from earlier in the chat that I just wanted to address first. Evelyn asked, she says, according to Edith Reed, the Luntz moved to Hammondville first. And can you please repeat the date that they moved across the river?
Yeah, I said 1763 from Evelyn's work, but she might, if she's on this call, she might be able to clarify that or even correct me. I'm assuming that when they came here to Crocs Point, that they built this structure, but that's sort of my assumption.
I don't know if that was Evelyn Newell that asked that question. Evelyn, if that was your question, did you want to unmute your mic and weigh in on that?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, it took me a while to find my unmute. Yeah, that was me that asked the question. I just found a document at King's Landing that was a transcription of an interview with Edith Reed, and she mentioned the Hammondville. So I was just wondering if when they moved to Hammondville, when they crossed the river, 1863. Yeah, I might have suggested that date. And my mind is not recalling it now, but yeah, just if there's anything else you can add to that.
I can't, because I was basing everything on your work, Evelyn.
Looks like I have some work to do then. Thanks. I'll pass on the information.
And Evelyn, while we have you, was it also your question about the interesting artifact?
Yes.
Why don't you go ahead and ask that for Gary now?
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering about the most interesting artifact that you found in the house.
Yeah, and I should have put a picture in of that, but I found a red coat, a military red coat. And after the pandemic is over, I know there's a guy at UNB who's into military uniforms, but I'm hoping it's a Loyalist Revolutionary War red coat. But I don't know that yet. Yeah, I found it on top of the oil tank.
That's amazing. I hope we get to see that on display someday.
And it had a little, there was a little old British flag with it, like a little, like hand waving faded British flag. So yeah, I don't know, but it looks like a British military uniform.
Amazing. Great answer. I wanted to address a question we are getting from the Gleasons, who are joining us from Bangor. Hi, Gleasons. And they ask if this presentation is going to be available to view online after it's done. And the answer to that is yes. We have been recording this presentation and we will have it available for viewing on our, we'll put a link to it on our website after this is all said and done. So you can feel free to revisit all of this great, interesting information. Now we have a question from Russ, actually. So Russ, did you want to ask Gary your question?
Can I interrupt for just a moment? This is Mike Gleason and we're new to your website. So what is your website?
Our website, I'll put it in the chats. It's www.keswickridge.ca, but I'll put that down in the chats as well. Thanks, Mike. Russ, over to you.
Okay, well, it's quick. I just was wondering if when the ferry actually was installed there, and if Lunt had known about the ferry, if you know this, whether Lunt knew there was going to be a ferry there, because it would make a difference, I would think, to, you know, whether you'd want to buy the house.
I think some type of ferry was in existence before he got there. And the reason I think that is because on the property plans, on the Loyalist property plans, which would have been, 1780, whatever, it designates that area as a ferry crossing. So I think it was a ferry crossing 100 years before Enoch.
And I suppose it was a ferry crossing because that's the logical place in terms of the structure of the river and so forth.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But all I have to base that on is the Loyalist property plan. So.
Great, thank you. A comment from Susan Brigham, who thanks you for the presentation. Gary, I hope you get a chance to go through when you're done and read some of the great comments that are in the chats. She has some great memories visiting Edith Reed and Mildred and Colin Dunphy, and one of her earliest memories of living in Keswick Ridge. She was 4 years old when she moved there, and we'll be visiting in the future. That's great, Susan. Thanks for tuning in today. Now, Beth,
my closest friends at Keswick Ridge School, so that's really cool.
Oh, that's so great. Beth, you have some questions about riverboat travels and a fact about some trees. Did you want to unmute your mic, Beth, please, and ask your question for Gary?
Sure. So I'm actually in Regina, but I grew up and Mildred was a second mother to me. So we used to spend all our summers there. The question I had about the riverboat was, had you checked the old riverboat routes, Gary? Because the old people used to talk about the fact that the riverboats always ended in Fredericton because the water is so shallow when you head upriver from. So I wasn't sure if the riverboats ever actually made it up to Crocs Point or not.
Yeah, that's, I had always thought that as well, but I found that there were riverboats that went to Woodstock.
Oh, wow.
So apparently, I don't know, maybe they had shallower bottom boats, or so certain boats went to Woodstock.
So, and the other things which come from what I've heard, there were trees on your property, what's now your property, that were marked for His Majesty's Navy because they were tall and straight and could be used for masts on the old wooden ships that, and apparently as recently as when my dad used to travel through those woods, they were still there. So I thought that was interesting. And the other thing I was going to point out, you talked about the 7 Years' War and the fact that there was activity. My parents used to have their garden right where the school bus turns now. And when they were gardening, they actually found a cannonball in that garden. So that fits with your words about the 7 Years' War activity.
Incredible. That's something I'd like to look more into at some point. And if anybody knows more about that, Evelyn may have more information on that too, like what happened there during the 7 Years' War, and do we even know?
I actually always thought that maybe there should be some sort of archaeological dig on that spot, because they also found China dolls' heads, bits of crockery. So obviously, maybe during the French occupation, there may have been a house there or something that might be worth doing a little digging. Of course, right now it's a school bus turning spot, but anyway, those are my thoughts and comments.
Thank you so much. What a great future project. I'm thinking that post-COVID, Gary's got a lot of work to do.
I have a lot of work to do. Yeah.
That's true. So Mike Gleason put another great comment in there. He said there's a stretch of woods well north of Bangor called King's Pines, in which trees selected for the Royal Navy were given the Royal Blaze. It was a capital offense to be found in possession of one of those trees. The American Revolution happened before they could be harvested, and they're alleged to still be identifiable. So who knows? You might have some historic trees in your backyard too. Kaylee Curry has a great question for you, Gary. Why don't you unmute your mic there, Kaylee, and go ahead and ask Gary.
Yeah, so just to start, that was the best estate sale I've ever been to in my life, and I don't know if any estate sale can ever really top it. Anywho, could you tell us a little bit more about this treasure that was found in the 50s? I had never heard of it, and I told Mom as soon as you said it, and she's never heard of it either, and she's been kicking around these parts for quite a while now, so I'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
I really wish I could, but I do know the grandson of the guy who found the treasure, and apparently the treasure was taken to Montreal and sold. So I do know that, and I'm also told that it was found in a swamp, and the swamp that particular year was a very dry year, and the swamp dried up that year. And so it's not like they went digging for it. It was two boys that found it, and they just saw it because the swamp had dried up. And that, Kaylee, is all I know. But I know there's other people on Keswick Ridge who know way more about that than I do.
I think I need to go get a metal detector and start doing a little bit of going for some walks in the woods now.
Yeah, I got one for Christmas, so maybe I'll see you out there.
Okay, perfect.
We've got Eugene Price on. Thanks, Kaylee. We've got Eugene Price on who has some comments about the project and memories. Eugene, did you want to unmute and weigh in with your comments?
It's actually not Eugene, it's Mary Lou. I'm just using his iPad this afternoon.
Sorry, Mary Lou.
Thanks, Gary. Great presentation. And I just think it's really great that someone has taken on the project of restoring the house. That house was actually the home I grew up in. So my great-grandfather was Enoch Lunt. So it's nice to see that it's getting some love and attention. And you made a comment about all the elm trees. I remember very, very clearly growing up as a child, and all the elm trees that lined the road all the way from where the bus stop is now right up to where the ferry landed. There were also a lot of maple trees, so I can understand why the first French gentleman had the maple syrup business there, because when I was a child, my father tapped all of those maple trees and along the road. And when we got home from school, we used to have to go with our wagon and collect all the sap and take it home. And my mother, there was a wood stove in the kitchen, and she would boil down all that sap in the kitchen. You can imagine what it was like in there. It was sticky and humid. Anyway, maple syrup was great. So it was nice to see that my family kind of carried on that maple syrup tradition there. And the house being neglected over the years, my grandfather, Luli's husband, his name was Goodrich Sloat. He died in, I can't remember the date, but in the 1920s. He went in to have a hernia operation. Of course, the great anesthetics that they had in those days, he did not survive. So she was left with 5 children, and there was still a mortgage on the farm at that time. So she obviously the children and her carried on the farm and kept going, but there obviously, I remember my mother talking about how difficult the times were, and of course there was no extra money to do any kinds of repairs and things to the house. So that's why you found all those nice little treasures in there, Gary. And I just want to tell you, Gary, too, that you think you took a lot of stuff out of that house. My mother passed away in 2000, and my sister didn't move in till I can't remember, maybe around 2005 or 2006. And she was not prepared right after my mom died to go through anything in the house. So it sat empty for a bit with everything still in it. Well, we cleaned it. We thought we had cleaned out a lot. We cleaned out over 500 garbage bags full of stuff. And we also took out a lot of stuff out of the basement. So we did do some pre-work for you, Gary.
Thank you.
But you have to understand.
That's hilarious.
My mother never threw anything away because she grew up in that difficult time and believed you could always find a purpose for something.
Like ice cream containers, right?
Exactly. Right. Yep. And bottles, glass bottles too. Right. Yeah. So she always believed purpose for everything, but we did try to clean some of it up. But then, of course, when my sister moved in, she moved all of her things that she had in there. And she was very much like my mother in that she never threw anything away either. And I'm trying not to be like them. Anyway, I just wanted to make those comments. And I really liked, Gary, you didn't mention how you took some of the old foundation stones and put them around the back for your fire pit. And I thought that was such an awesome idea. And I hope that once you get settled there, that I'll be over for bonfires.
Yep.
And sit on those old stones.
Bring your marshmallows, Mary Lou.
Okay, we'll have s'mores.
Yeah.
We'll have s'mores. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you, Gary, for taking on that project. It's wonderful to see it being restored. Does my heart good.
Awesome.
Oh, that's wonderful, Mary Lou. And did you say you had some comments about the treasure as well?
Oh, right, the treasure. Well, the treasure, there's lots of family stories about it, but it was found on the property up behind the house. And you're right, it was in a swampy area. But our family's side of that is that there were a couple of gentlemen who found it using a metal detector, and that probably the swamp probably was dried some, but there were always the stories about it being there apparently for years. And I think it's great that someone actually did find it, and you can see the cannon. I'm not sure where the cannon is now.
I'd love to know.
Yeah.
There was a question about that from Jennifer Wyatt, who wanted to know if it has anything to do with the cannon that the Historical Society has. And Anne, I wondered if you wanted to answer that.
Oh, gosh. Nancy, are you online? No, I think not. Our registrar, or Evelyn, our curator. Maybe you can talk about the canon. You folks in the collections committee know more about that than I do.
The canon that the Keswick Ridge Historical Society has is not that canon. Ours came from the Duplessis family and had different origin and roots and a whole different date to it. It's third quarter of the 19th century. But there is a canon that was donated to the Fredericton Region Museum, the York Sunbury Historical Society, that I believe is maybe possibly that canon. I've made inquiries to the Historical Society. I'm also on that board, so I was asking the collections committee. They have very little information on it. That cannon is currently on loan to the Gagetown Military Museum. So if you want to go see it, that's where it's at.
Okay.
This is such a great opportunity to pool all of our minds and resources to answer these questions. If you're not comfortable putting a question in the chat, I can scroll. If you want to ask a question and want to raise your hand, I can try to scroll through and see if I can identify you that way. Were there any other questions that people had? Scrolling through. I don't see any hands coming up. We'll give it, oh, we have another, some more chat. Barb Hoyt says that she saw a cannon at the Gagetown Military Museum that has reference to being from Crocs Point, and that was 2 years ago. That's great. Mike Gleason also hopes that the cannonball that whoever found in the garden is inert and perhaps it should be inspected. Excellent point. Were there any other questions that anyone had for Gary about his presentation?
Heather,
Yeah.
it's Sheila. I don't have a question, but I do have a little memory to share, and it's I think it was in the 90s. I went down to interview Edith Sloat Reed about her experiences during the Depression. And she told me a beautiful story about how home economics women came out to the Ridge to the community hall. They were sent there by, I guess they worked for the Department of Agriculture in those days. And they came out to explain to women how they could save money during the Depression. And Edith said they were shown how to make buttons out of butternuts. And in those days, the Keswick Islands were covered with butternut trees, and butternuts were in abundance. And I said, how on earth did they make buttons out of butternuts? And she said, oh, well, you dried them and then you took slices of the butternut and dried it and polished it and drilled a couple of holes in it. And that's how we made buttons. And then she said, well, I've got some here. And she went over to a drawer and pulled open the drawer. And I was expecting her to come out with some of these butternut buttons. And finally she said, oh, I just can't put my hands on them. She said, but I know I had a bunch of butternut buttons. And that was in the 90s. And of course, she's talking about something that they did in 1930. And I just got a big kick out of the story, and I just love it. I treasure it.
Did you find any butternut buttons, Gary, when you were going through?
If I had, I probably wouldn't have known what they were. Sorry.
What a wonderful memory, Sheila. Thank you.
Oh.
All right. Well, I think, we have, yes. So Mike Gleason says the woodwork and furniture in St. Mark's Chapel of Ease at King's Landing is butternut. And he's told it's now extinct, at least in New Brunswick. I don't believe it's extinct, but I think it is certainly endangered, on the endangered list. There's still a lot of butternuts around this area, probably still around your house too, Gary. Have you seen any?
I haven't yet, but I'll keep an eye out.
Yeah. Great. So I think maybe we will turn it over to Anne.
You're muted.
There we go. Sorry. Gary, thanks. It was a wonderful way to start this series. Thank everyone for attending. And I just want to say one more thing. We welcome new members to the Keswick Ridge Historical Society. And if you want to find out more about us, what we're all about, and in particular, our capital campaign, because we are currently fundraising to construct an addition to the McKean's Corner stores for storage of our artifacts. You can find out about us on our website, www.keswickridge.ca. And you can also find out about us by looking us up on Facebook. Please join us for the next talk, which will be on April 11th. And our speaker is going to be Roger Nason, And Roger's going to talk to us about a glimpse at the history of the Tripp family farm and the beginnings of Tripp settlement from 1784 to the 1940s. And I think the Tripps were mentioned briefly today, so that should be a very interesting follow-up. Till April 11th, then, this link will work for that talk as well. Then we hope to see you all then, and stay safe. Bye.